out of College of Redwoods, and her presentation is with Liberty and Justice for the Deaf, Human Rights and America's Deaf Culture. Go ahead.
Yeah! You pronounce my name like a true Italian.
Sono italiana.
All right. When we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, we hold America to the standard of liberty and justice for all. And this includes people who are deaf or hard of hearing. According to the National Institute on Deafness, over 37 million or 15% of American adults report having trouble hearing. Whether it be a friend, a classmate, or a relative, there's a good chance you will at some point encounter someone who is deaf. What does liberty and justice mean for the deaf citizens of America? I have had the opportunity to interact with wonderful people from the deaf community in my hometown, Eureka. In fact, I'm missing a deaf event at this very moment, so I can come here. I'm currently enrolled in my second year of sign language. My experience has compelled me to think deeply about the culture and dignity of people who are deaf. My goals for this presentation are to inform you about deaf culture and human rights and to encourage civil inclusion of people who are deaf. While every person is entitled to basic human rights, I'd like to focus on a specific set of rights that are essential to the deaf community. The right to sign language, the right to accessibility, and the right to an interpreter. In order to understand deaf rights, you must first be aware of two very different ways of viewing deafness. The medical model versus the cultural view. When deaf is written with a lowercase d, it refers to the medical model, the physical condition of not hearing. Those who see deafness through this lens view it as a disability, as a problem to be solved. But when the D in deaf is capital, it signifies a person who identifies with the deaf community, a cultural group bonded together by common experiences and a common language, according to Dr. William Vickers. The deaf community includes those who are hard of hearing, completely deaf, children of deaf adults, or CODAs, and anyone else who participates in the culture. Each person with a hearing loss must make a choice. He must decide whether to see himself as a person who is disabled or as a part of something bigger, America's deaf culture. For those who identify with the deaf community, learning to sign is indispensable. American Sign Language, or ASL, is at the core of a culturally deaf identity. The National Association of the Deaf asserts that the use of ASL is an essential human right. Dr. Beth Benedict, a deaf professor at Gallaudet University, defines ASL as a spatial and visual language that does not require sound and emphasizes the use of hands, faces, bodies, and eyes. ASL is used throughout the United States and Canada. It has been used since the 1800s but wasn't officially recognized as a language until 1960. There are a few different ways to sign in America. The first is straight American Sign Language, which has its own grammar and syntax. The second, Pidgin Signed English, uses ASL vocabulary and English word order. The third option, Signing Exact English, uses extra words, prefixes, and tenses to create a very complicated visual form of English. Fingerspelling, in addition, is very important in ASL as it is used for names, places, and other words that don't have their own sign. Contrary to popular belief, sign language is not universal. There are several different sign languages around the world, just as there are thousands of spoken languages. For example, British Sign Language uses a two-handed alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. While American Sign Language, which you have probably seen this many times, uses a one-handed alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Providing sign language to deaf children is not an easy task. The National Institute on Deafness reports that over 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. And of these parents, only 15% learn to fully communicate with their child through sign language. My sign language teacher, who has worked with deaf children, explained that many deaf children don't learn to sign until they are 5 years old, when they learn from a deaf program or from a sign language interpreter at school. By the time they are 5 years old, most hearing children are receptive of thousands of words and can already form full sentences. Douglas Bainton's book, Forbidden Signs, American Culture and the Campaign Against Sign Language, explores the oralism movement of the 19th century. During this time, many educators believed that the best way to educate deaf children was through speech and lip reading. Deaf schools devoted to oralism would often forbid the use of sign language. As Bainton explains, many people viewed sign language as the inferior language of inferior peoples. The language of deaf people was linked with the language of savages. This rhetoric was used both in popular media and scholarly writings. The English anthropologist Edward Tyler referenced the gesture signs of savages and deaf mutes. Charles Darwin, the evolutionary theorist, referred to gestures as a form of communication used by the deaf and dumb and by savages. To this day, many believe that speech and lip reading are superior to sign language. While learning to speak and lip read is a valid option for a person who is deaf, it must remain that person's personal choice to decide whether to speak, to sign, or to do both. In any case, only by the recognition and acceptance of American Sign Language will deaf citizens be given the liberty of expression that they deserve. This short film may help you to understand the perspective of deaf citizens. I'm wondering if the sound will work or not. All right, then no sound. That's okay. Sometimes we use a different language to communicate. Sometimes we can speak. Sometimes we don't. Some of us like to wear hearing aids or cochlear implants to hear. Some of us need interpreters to communicate with others. Please don't force us to wear hearing aids or lip read for your benefit. That is our personal and private choice. Don't make decisions for us without our participation or permission. You'd be shocked. We are doctors, lawyers, filmmakers, race car drivers, teachers, inventors, CEOs, chefs, video gamers, musicians, singers, comedians, writers, and parents. The list goes on. Need we say more? Sometimes we are perfectly happy being who we are. In addition to supporting sign language, our country needs to work toward accessibility between the deaf and hearing cultures. While America's level of accessibility has been improving, there is still a communication barrier between deaf signers and hearing English speakers. A recent study, Public Speaking Courses and the Hearing Impaired College Student, documents the experience of having a deaf student in a public speaking class at the University of Colorado. The deaf student remarked, "I'm really good at reading lips. It's not that hard to communicate with me. I guess some students are just afraid to." He later wrote, "I feel there is a barrier between the hearing and non-hearing cultures." His point was reaffirmed when hearing students said things like, "I felt very uneasy trying to understand what he was saying. And if you put him in my group, will my grade suffer? I want an A, and I think he'll hurt my chances." The class instructor spoke of an invisible barrier between the deaf and hearing students, which showed when two hearing students would turn their faces away and talk among themselves, excluding their deaf partner from the conversation. According to the class interpreter, this caused the deaf person to be hesitant to talk with his classmates for fear of being rejected. This shows that the barrier is not only from physical limitations, but from feelings of fear and inexperience among hearing and deaf students. Currently, a popular movement within the deaf community is the fight for closed captions. Closed captions, or subtitles, are necessary for deaf people on every type of video so that they can have equal access to information. The most recent victory of deaf activism is the addition of closed captions to White House videos posted on the internet. A deaf filmmaker named Bron Jordan, who you can see here, had noticed that certain videos of the president weren't captioned. "If the White House leads by example, others will follow suit," he insisted in a video. While attending an event at the White House, Jordan asked a public engagement director why these videos weren't captioned. He was told that the topic had been brought up, but nothing had happened. So he ignited a widespread social media movement called White House Closed Captions Now. And it worked. The government swiftly added captions to the online videos. Perhaps the U.S. should follow the example of Canada in our quest for accessibility. Consider this restaurant called Signs, which opened about a year ago in Toronto, Ontario, a city with over 30,000 deaf citizens. Most of the employees at this classy Canadian restaurant are deaf, and customers order their meals using sign language cheat sheets. The walls are decorated with photos of the ASL alphabet. This is one of the first restaurants of its kind. The manager, Rachel Shemuel, said, "We wanted to create a dining experience to change the misconception that deaf people are disabled, when in fact they just speak another language." The restaurant has been extremely popular so far. This is one success of many on the road to accessibility as America strives to create a bridge, rather than a barrier, between the deaf and hearing cultures. Sign language interpreters are one direct way to build this bridge. The World Federation of the Deaf lists the right to an interpreter as one of the primary human rights of people who are deaf. The job of an interpreter is to translate spoken language into sign language and vice versa in order to foster communication between a deaf person and those around them. Interpreters work anywhere where people communicate. Schools, doctor appointments, concerts, the CIA, you name it. Not only does this career help deaf people to communicate, but it provides jobs for many hearing people. A real-life example told to me by a local interpreter, Phaedra, shows just how much of a difference interpreting can make. For the past 4 years, Phaedra has been interpreting for a deaf 7th grade girl at a local middle school. Before the girl had an interpreter, she was placed in the school's special ed program, as if her mind had a problem and not just her ears. But when Phaedra arrived on the scene, the girl was moved into the grade level classes. Since she could finally understand the information, she began getting straight A's and soon made it onto the honor roll. This proves that her mind had never had a problem in the first place. The only issue was a lack of access to information. This brings up the issue of deafness as an intellectual disability. An intellectual disability is defined as below average intelligence and set of life skills present before age 18. The main symptom is difficulty thinking and understanding. The book Forbidden Signs reports an article from the New York Evening Post, which claims that the use of gesture with or in lieu of speech is a sign of feeble intellectual power. Though the article is from a century ago, this belief is still present in America today. Deaf children being placed in special ed classes is a very common occurrence in our country. Society needs to realize that deaf people are just as intelligent and as capable as the rest of us. A study from Gallaudet Research Institute shows that deaf and hard of hearing students have been increasingly placed in public schools ever since the 1970s. By 2003, 91% of deaf students attended mainstream schools. Because of this trend, the need for school interpreters is greater than ever. And by providing these school interpreters, we can change the norm of treating deaf children as disabled and help them to exceed and have success in their education. In essence, liberty and justice for the deaf citizens of America consists in respecting deaf identity and culture. This can be done by advocating for the right to American Sign Language, the right to accessibility, and the right to an interpreter. I hope you come away from this presentation with a better awareness of deafness, not only as a physical condition, but as a culture with its own language and human rights. I'd like to conclude with a quote by Marlee Matlin, a famous deaf actress and author. "Every day, I wake up and I think, what can I do to get my message across loud and clear that I can do anything except hear?" Thank you.
Okay, 5 minutes for questions.
If you were to advise a young person who was deaf, would you advise them to learn how to lip read and move more into the mainstream, or would you say signing would be better and move more into the deaf community?
I would definitely advise a deaf person first and foremost to learn sign language and meet up with people in their deaf community, because it's really important for them to have role models who they can communicate with fully. While I do support them learning to speak and lip read if they so choose, I think signing is very important because it's a visual language and these are a visual people. And they can communicate so much more easily when signing. But if they lip read, it takes so much work to see what a person is saying. And on average, they only get about 10 to 20% if it's a person they don't know who's talking, and if it's a person they know who's speaking, it's more like 30 to 40%. So lip reading is a lot of work and it's highly inaccurate, and it can cause a deaf person to feel isolated from other people. So I think signing first and foremost, and especially for deaf, if you need to know anything about deaf culture, I would say if you ever have a deaf children or a deaf child or know somebody who does, that family should learn to sign with their child. Because I know deaf children in my hometown whose parents only know about 10 signs each, and they don't really have a good relationship or a relationship at all. So I think signing first and foremost, speech and lip reading second.
Thank you.
How do you think we can make them, if you're deaf, be able to communicate with the general population, bridging to, like, should we be taught ASL in the school curriculum more, or things like that as kids are growing up?
Yes, I do think that ASL in the schools is a very effective route for deaf children in mainstream schools to be able to communicate with their classmates. While interpreters do make a big difference, it is still a third person who has to aid in communication, and it's a much more direct way if a child's friends can communicate directly with them. So I believe that all American students should be taught at least the sign language alphabet, if not more, in elementary schools, and that ASL should be able to fill the foreign language requirement of American high schools. Yeah?
I'm just curious, how do the cheat sheets work?
The cheat sheets work
In the
very
restaurant?
well.
I mean, how does that-
Unfortunately, I've never been to the restaurant, but on the menu, I've seen pictures. They'll have the foods and then they'll have little pictures of signs next to it, the signs you'll need to order the foods. And not only do they have the alphabet on the walls, but they have signs like, thank you, please, meat, sandwich, taco, you know, well,
So you don't have to
noodles.
spell it out
You
from
don't
the
have
wall.
to spell it
Okay.
out, and they have the actual
That would
signs.
be done.
Yeah, I would love to try that. Anyone else?
Why do you think, I was surprised at the low percentage of parents of deaf children who don't know how to sign completely. What do you think is behind that?
Well, a lot of times when a parent has a child who is deaf, the doctors will come to them with long faces and say, I'm very sorry, your child is deaf. Here are the options, here's the audiologist and the speech therapist. In order to make them associate with normal culture, we recommend sending them to speech therapy every day. And that is the first viewpoint they see of deafness. They don't even see the deaf culture side of it at all. And they are told that if their child learns to sign, it will diminish their ability to learn to speak and lip read, which is not true. The most important thing is that these children have a language, and the sign language is the most accessible language to them. And from that point on, once they have an understanding of the world, it becomes much easier to learn to speak and lip read.
So you said Gallaudet a couple of times
Yes.
in the presentation. What is that?
Gallaudet is a university in Washington, D.C., originally signed and practiced by Abraham Lincoln, and it is a deaf-run university for deaf students or students who are studying to become interpreters, where they can study any major they want, and it's a very popular cultural hub for the deaf community, valuable resource in our country. I think it's the only completely deaf-run university in the world that I know of.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Stella.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Kathleen Kirsinger from Saddleback College. And her presentation is on Banshees of the Modern Age,